Can I say something first?
Sure, please do.
I found Dave when I kind of subbed in as Licensing Committee Chair. He was here in August. I gave him a ride around in a golf cart to all 4 lakes. He had a look at them. We stopped at one in particular where, you know, it's the little lakes back there, look terrible. He was in Effingham and good enough to come in to do us a presentation. I think he's going to have a lot of good ideas and things that his company does. So, Dave.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for taking the time and the interest to come along. We are essentially 2 companies. SIS Bio is an Australian company, and a lot of people think I've got an Australian accent. That's not actually the case, but I'm not going to argue with that. And that's really the technology supplier. That's where all the research and development and clever stuff has been done. Then you got the guys like me. CleanFlow is the US operation. We're maybe not quite as smart as those guys, but we actually deliver the results. So our take on the water cycle, people talk about a water cycle a lot. Our take on the water cycle is a little different in that, you know, water is in a perpetual loop. For the water that people need, we have to treat it, clean it, purify it, bring it to drinking water standards, and then distribute it. And then, once it's been used, either it goes down the drain or we flush it down the toilet, and it gets to a wastewater treatment plant. And then historically, and this is, I've drawn this presentation from what I gave yesterday, which was to the Illinois Rural Water Association. Once we discharge the water from the wastewater treatment plants, we think it's all over, and we kind of hand it over to nature and trust that nature is going to be able to clean that water up again, so the next time we want to use it, or the next guys down the river that want to use it or whatever, it'll be of a standard where we can treat it. And that is trusting in the processes that nature has had for the last million and probably billions of years in cleaning that up. And in many ways, the problem with water globally is we put all our effort, all our time, all our money into managing water in the pipes, and that's not really where it's going wrong. Until it's gone wrong so badly that we can't draw it into the pipes, and then we've got no answers. So on a bigger scale, that's our sort of take on things. So we have this fundamental kind of distinction and divide between water in the pipes and what we call biological water. And the point that we made, and it's probably worth making this point now, in wastewater treatment, once the water hits a sewage treatment plant, until then you've tried to eliminate all biology. You don't want bacteria and bugs and anything like that in the water. Once it is a wastewater treatment plant, the whole idea of a wastewater treatment plant is to kick back in as actively as you can biological processes. And in essence what you do is a typical wastewater treatment plant, all the raw sewage comes into a settling tank, the solids will separate and you take that off. Now you've got water that's full of nutrients. You put that into, they call it biological nutrient removal tank or an activated sludge tank. The idea is to grow as much bacterial biomass as fast as possible to create sludge and sediment. Because in doing that, you've created biomass and you've taken the nutrients out of the water. And then they put it into a second clarifier, separator, take that microbial biomass out, and now you've got water where you've dropped the nutrient levels to a significant degree. To do that, you want concrete, steel, and pumps and motors and so on. Here you're relying on biological processes, and this is where we focus. So the sort of things we encounter are things like this in parks and recreational sort of things. Drinking water reservoirs, and you'll see that is completely contaminated with toxic cyanobacteria over the dam wall into the river, and if you look downstream, it's just propagating it all the way down. And that increasingly is really where all the problems are. This, I've just come back from South Africa. That's a river with invasive floating weeds, and they're basically using a crop sprayer to put herbicides on it to try and kill the weed off. And I'll explain just now why that's a really bad way of going about things. So the sort of headlines that we see are, there's the water shortage. This refers to Toledo in 2014, when the water in Lake Erie was so toxic and so full of toxic cyanobacteria, they couldn't process it, the taps ran dry. But there's no shortage of water in Lake Erie. The mere fact that you've got a 700 square mile toxic algae bloom tells you there's lots of water there. So it's a quality problem, not a quantity problem. But since then, the same sort of problem has popped up all around the country. And this is where you get to the point where you cannot draw water into the pipes anymore. So all that built infrastructure isn't much good to you if the water isn't the quality that you can bring in. And it is a global problem. The fancy word for it is eutrophication. Particularly in the US, probably because they know the word. A lot of the rest of the world don't even know the word. But there's a big misunderstanding. They think that this is because the nutrient levels are too high. The root of that word, it actually means well nourished. So if we drill down into it, we've got to say, well, why would a well nourished aquatic environment be a problem? And the obvious answer is because it's the algae, the cyanobacteria, the invasive weeds that are well nourished, not the food web that's necessary to clear all that stuff, consume it, and get rid of that biomass. So that means we're fundamentally talking about this nutrient cycle, which is nutrients produce biomass, and what they call primary biomass, which is your sort of first level in the hierarchy, is just photosynthesis by either plants or in the aquatic environment by algae, take up raw nutrients and produce that algal biomass from it. As you work your way up the trophic levels of the food web, animal life doesn't create biomass from square one the same way the plants do, from basic nutrients. It consumes that biomass. In doing so, we consume, the waste gets excreted, decomposes, becomes nutrients again. That's the wastewater treatment process that I've just explained. Or the biomass dies off, eventually decomposes, and the same sort of thing happens. So in an aquatic environment, to understand what's going on in the lakes and so on, you will always have nutrients coming in, you always have had nutrients coming in. In a well-balanced environment, those nutrients will produce algae, the food web, we've got two fish there, but really that's everything from zooplankton to crustaceans to small fish to bigger fish and so on, will consume that algae and maintain a balance, and then there will be animal life on the land, which a lot of you guys with the fishing rods and birds of prey and things like that will come and remove that, and so you've got a nutrient clearance mechanism that's constantly at play. And as long as that balance is maintained, your water remains healthy. So where it goes wrong is, we get these increase in nutrient inflows. It might be an event, stormwater event or something like that, suddenly washes a lot in. Or typically, and particularly in this part of the world, they say you can more or less set your clock about 50 years after there's settlement around a lake, you hit these sort of problems. So the chronic process of increased nutrients, whether it's from septic tanks or lawn fertilizers or whatever it is. And what that means is there's more algae produced than the food web can consume during the lifespan of that algae. So it's like having a massive buffet. Food web can have what it wants, but there's a lot left over. That dies off, goes to the bottom, decomposes, and that's where the problem starts, because when the excess, the unconsumed excess dies off and goes to the bottom, that's when you start getting the sediment building up. And once the sediment builds up, often the first obvious signs are invasive weeds. And our take on that, it's not really invasive weeds, it's invasive muck and sediment. The weeds just go along for the ride because they can. When the dead algae and dead plant life and dead anything settles on the bottom and decomposes. It uses the oxygen in the water at the bottom of the water column. So you start getting this deoxygenation at the bottom. One of the most important parts of the food web is what they call the benthic zooplankton. The zooplankton are the small organisms that live in that sediment. When that becomes anoxic, they can no longer survive. So that whole level of the food web in the parts of the lake that are anoxic gets wiped out. And over time, you'll have more and more sediment accumulating. People often are not too aware of it. You'll have more and more deoxygenation until then you start getting nutrients recycled from the sediment. So now you've got a secondary source of nutrients that start to kick in. And so you'll have even more algae being produced over time than would normally be the case. And basically, year after year, season after season, even within seasons, this sort of cycle goes, sediment accumulates, there's more and more deoxygenation, to the point where eventually there's large parts of the water column the animal life can't exist in. So the food web that should be clearing that becomes more and more constrained. And there's an interesting story about that down at Indian Lake in Cuba. When I first went there, I was out on the lake with one of the lake committee members, and I was explaining this and said, in time it'll impact fish. And he said, well, we don't have that problem here. There's lots and lots of fish. And he had a fish finder on his boat. And as it happened, our guys are out doing the bathymetric scan of the lake, and they just sent me a message saying there's no oxygen below 15 feet. And the lake is about 40 feet deep. So I looked at the fish finder and I said, yeah, but Mike, where are the fish? He said, no, they're all there. I said, yeah, but how far? He said, well, down to about 12, 13, 14 feet. I said, well, that's the point. That's why they're easy to catch. Because they're all being compressed up into that little portion. You can pull them out, but, think about what's going to happen long term. So the nutrient clearance channels become more and more constrained. And the whole process gets worse and worse. More and more recycling until it becomes totally eutrophic. What a lot of time, money, and effort has been spent on is then trying to reduce nutrient inflows. And we had a classic encounter with somebody in New York over that. There's a bit of debate going on, and they said, we believe in this lake, it's probably the most successful project in the world in reducing nutrient inflows. And I said, I bet it hasn't made a blind bit of difference, because I knew that historically they'd had a big cyanobacteria problem. And they said, well, yeah, you're right, that's what we can't figure out. And the whole point is, if your clearance mechanism is gone and you reduce the nutrient inflows, it doesn't matter, because this has become self-sustaining from the sediment. So, what's going on externally kind of becomes irrelevant. This is self-containing. So, this is our first point of departure. What a lot of lake consultants and managements and the common practice has been to measure the phosphate levels in the water, measure the pH and the conductivity, measure how much orthophosphate, how much total phosphate, and so on. In our view, you're really shuffling the deck chairs around on the Titanic and you're still heading for the iceberg. And you're measuring a lot of second-order symptoms and not getting to root causes. And the root causes are, that sediment nutrient stockpile, the degree of hypoxia, of oxygen depletion, and the extent to which nutrient cycling has become self-sustaining. And unless you address those, you're not going to get to a solution. So with that hopefully understood, and I should maybe stop and say, are there any questions there? Or does that sort of make sense?
So, past number of years, we've been applying herbicides, I guess.
That's what we're going to get. That's what we're going to get to just now. Yeah. So first, before we get to that, is to understand, and I don't know, I can't remember whether you have a problem with toxic HABs or not, but it's kind of the destination that most eutrophic lakes are going to. So just to understand that a little bit, how is it that as these lakes become more and more eutrophic, you get more and more of these toxic cyanobacteria coming in and taking over, and that's when the dogs die and the place gets shut, property prices all go south and so on. So the cyanobacteria have a few tactics that they can use in environments like this to outcompete the good green algae, which is far better nutrition for the food web. And so they then start to kind of hijack the environment. First thing they can do is, and I'm using inverted commas because the botanists would argue with the terminology, but it's what makes it easier to understand. They form what they call acarnites, which are a bit like seeds. So they can sit in the sediment over winter, early in the year, as early as now, and we had this at Indian Lake. They will start to germinate. They start stirring up the sediment as that happens, and they will start producing cyanobacteria and get a jump start on the algae. So straight away you have those sort of problems. And there's a common perception that algae and cyanobacteria only happen in summer. That tends to be when there's more of them, but people realizing more and more cyanobacteria are able to, like I say, get a head start on the rest. The other thing is you'll tend to have more oxygen near the surface and less down at the bottom. Phosphorus is less soluble where there's more oxygen and more soluble at the bottom. So that means you're going to have higher levels of phosphorus as a nutrient near the bottom. When it comes to nitrogen, near the top where there's oxygen, it will be present as nitrate, which you'll see there NO3, the O is the oxygen. At the bottom, it's present as ammonia. From a metabolic chemistry point of view, when the algae or the phytoplankton want to use nitrogen, need to use nitrogen as a nutrient, if it's nitrate, they have to first convert it to ammonia and then they can use it. If it's ammonia, then the cyanobacteria in particular can just soak it up. So why this is important is the cyanobacteria are able to control their buoyancy. They have little gas vacuoles in their cells, and what they do is deflate those at night and go down to the bottom, and now they literally have a buffet spread on for them. So they can load up on phosphorus, they load up on the ammonia. They're now got plenty of food stocks. Early hours of the morning they go back up to the surface, and now they can hog the sunlight and proliferate and outcompete the algae. A lot of other things going on, but they're the main ones. Now, to get to the point that you made, historically what we've done is attack the symptoms and not the root causes. And if I've explained this properly, hopefully this part will be fairly easy to understand. If you apply herbicides, you wipe out the weeds, they die off, decompose, you've just created more nutrient-rich sediment at the bottom. The exact same thing with algicides. You kill the algae off, goes out at the bottom, decomposes, you've created more sediment. And that applies to chemical algicides, and also they're coming out with these ultrasonic algicides. There's no difference. They've done the research. They logically know that they have the same negative effects. The other thing that people use are these phosphorus precipitants, alum, and there are even more expensive versions of that out there as well. Again, what that does is push the phosphorus down to the bottom, where the algae that have to float at the top and take what they can, they now suddenly are on starvation diet. You put it down at the bottom where the cyanobacteria can get to it. They say that it locks in. I think it's pretty widely accepted now. It kind of semi-locks in and probably lasts for about a year or two. But those acarnites, it gets metabolized and so on, and it gets released again. And then lastly, and this is potentially the most difficult for us to communicate, is the difference between aeration and oxygenating the water. A lot of aeration systems are really taking pond aerators, ponds being 4, 6, maybe 7, 8 feet deep, and just aerating, just blowing air up to the surface. The effect of that is to increase dissolved oxygen at the top. It doesn't do anything at the bottom. So if anything, and there's been studies to show this, you actually worsen that gradient of the phosphorus. So there's even less at the top, there's more at the bottom, and that is why these things don't work. So that whole paradox of treatments is something that we've been talking about for years and years and years. In June 2022, the Government Accountability Office had been requested by a panel or committee of senators and congressmen to look into why is it, after 20 odd years of the EPA being tasked with addressing and fixing and managing the risks around hypoxia and harmful algae blooms, it just keeps getting worse and worse year after year. And after 2 years of study, they produced this report, and we can distribute it if anybody's interested in getting a copy. It's actually not that technical, not that difficult to read. And although it is, I think, something like 43 pages, they only kind of write down the middle part of the page. It's not word heavy, it's not difficult to understand. But the first thing they're saying is, what we do at the moment is we monitor. We measure, we measure, we measure, we measure until it's too late. We've got to have bloom that's toxic everywhere, and then we go and put signs up everywhere saying we failed, we failed, we failed. Right? That's not too clever. The other thing, in the language they used that we found quite gratifying, is it was pretty much exactly what we were saying. It's about hypoxia, it's about the animal life, the fish life in the food web, the ecosystem becoming disruptive, the accumulation of organic matter. This is the diagram they use, and it's almost like they borrowed it from us. There's nutrients coming in, algae is formed, dyes goes to the bottom, you have accumulation of nutrients in the sediment, oxygen depletion, nutrient recycling, more and more algae. If you apply algicides, it makes it worse, and the fish life get wiped out. So, the thinking is now changing, and what they've identified is you've got to address the root causes, hypoxia, the sediment, and the nutrient recycling, get the animal life in the food web back up and running. So now what I'll do is I'll drill down into those and show you what we do, and that we can quantify, we measure different things, we measure them differently, but the reason we do that is so that we can show we're achieving what needs to be achieved. So this is our oxygenation technology. Overtly, it doesn't look any different from the surface, and that's what the purpose of that video was to show. It sits there, you don't really notice it's there. This is a 30-foot deep lake. And they've measured at the surface, at the middle at 15 feet, and at the bottom. At 15 feet, and this is not Indian Lake, this is another one, at 15 feet you've got 0.04, that there's no dissolved oxygen. We commissioned the system, we aimed for 5 milligrams. Within 10 weeks, we got more dissolved oxygen at the bottom than they had at the top to start with. So, we've provided that oxygen throughout the water column. What that allows us to do is get active digestion of the sediment and get the food web back up and running. The other thing it does, which a lot of lakes have problems with, is coliforms. So often from goose poop and things like that, can be from septic tanks. In this case, there was an upstream sewage treatment plant, and every time there's a big stormwater event, all the stormwater inflow gets directed to the sewage plant and it just flushes it out and came down into here. So the limit is 300. You'll see it was sitting at 500 when we began the program on the 19th of July. This was about 10 years ago. And within 3 or 4 days, we've got it back in compliant until the big stormwater event and it goes through the roof. Coliforms really cannot tolerate and cannot dominate in well-oxygenated environment. So the fact that we can maintain dissolved oxygen means they can't compete. And you'll see there within 72 hours we have it back under control. And what used to happen is once one of these things happened, that was it for the whole of the rest of the summer. Now literally it's 24, 48 hours and then we're back up and running. Then to get into this biodredging, the getting rid of the muck and sediment. Now this is a smallish lake up in New Jersey, and one of the reasons we use it is you see a photograph of the whole lake. It was literally topped out from shore to shore with weeds because it wasn't not very deep, so the weeds could get all the way to the surface. And what we do here, after we have oxygenated, we're able to put enzymes in to digest the sediment. again, one of the misguided practices that people have been doing a lot in the past is thinking they're borrowing from wastewater treatment and saying, well, in wastewater treatment it's microbes, so let's put lots and lots of microbes into the lake. But in wastewater treatment, the purpose of the microbes is to produce sludge, to take up the nutrients and produce the sludge. You don't want to do that in a lake. By using enzymes, you're able to digest it. We use a lot of reasonably sophisticated bathymetry. So this is, looking at the depth profile from overhead, and the sort of thing we'll do is measure what is the area of this 10-foot contour. And then a year later we'll go and we'll see that the 10-foot contour has increased 50% because we've deepened it as it goes. The other thing we can do is do a transect and look at the lake in cross-section. And what happened here is the data before we started. The average depth of the lake was 6.3 feet, and it contained 70,000 cubic meters of water. The winter of 2019-2020 was pretty mild, and the weeds never died out. So came March 2020, and the Lake Committee said, we know what you say about herbicides, well, we're just going to nuke these things and get them out the way so that, and then it's up to you guys to take it from there. They did that in March. In May, we went and did another scan. On average, across the whole lake, they'd added with a single herbicide application 6 inches, half a foot of additional muck and sediment there. And so that, speaks to the question you had. And that had reduced the volume of water or increased the amount of sediment by 5,500 cubic meters. Despite that, by the end of 2020, we got to that, and by the end of 2021, we've gone from the green line to the red line. And we can quantify that. That was nearly 10,000 cubic meters of sediment that we digested out of there. And that's what it looked like. And so, again, to make the point, we're not measuring orthophosphate and pH and things like that. We're measuring what counts because these are the root causes. That's a before and after picture. If you look at the house up on the right, if you look at the house on the left, it is in fact the same place. You'd be surprised how often people use before and after pictures, but the before pictures in one place and the after pictures a few hundred miles away. And then this is this is seeing the difference in the sediment. The plant life changes. I've seen things, and it kind of almost brings tears to your eyes, and they're muck. And there was a little patch about the size of a dustbin lid or something like that was sandy. And the fish were swarming around there to try and lay their eggs there where there was a sandy bottom, as opposed to laying their eggs in all the muck and sediment. So, it does make a difference to the fish life. That was milfoil and pondweed and so on. This is slightly different. This is up in Michigan. You can see the change in the depth profile. Again, we can do a cross-section, and we can quantify how much we've increased it by, but the nature of the problem here was quite different. This is another way we measure it. So you've got a graduation. In the deep water, obviously the weeds can't grow because the sunlight doesn't penetrate, but all the way around the edges, and it goes from blue to green to yellow to orange to red. Where it's red, basically the whole water column is taken up with vegetation, and this was lily pads. So you pretty much couldn't get into the lake because there were lily pads all the way around the edge. And in the first year that we were treating this, there wasn't much happened. And in the second year, from April, May, people were phoning us almost every week saying, you won't believe it, these things are popping up, we're putting them out and so on. What we figured is the tubers, because they said they were pulling out tubers 10, 12 feet long and as thick as a man's leg, they were probably 8 inches deep in the sediment. And in the first year we digested 6 inches, so they were kind of just hanging on through that winter. And as soon as we started the following summer, they started popping out. And that was after 2 years. To give you some idea, so this radar unit we put right up against the edge of the lily pads, and that was the difference. That's an aerial shot taken from Google Earth. These guys are supposed to have a beach here, and you can see we've got it back for them. this then is more of the same, and I put this in because I know from the last time we read this is one of your problems. What we have here, that is a 2-foot contour. Those are 2 little 3-foot holes. So the whole of the top end of this lake, and it's 30 acres, is like 2 to 3 feet deep. And anything less than 10 feet was all taken up with weeds, so similar sort of problem. This is 5 years later, and this is what's nice about this, is we've got 5 years data to show that we can continue delivery. And I'll get into it now, but you can see that whole area is deepened. What we've done here is highlighted the 2-foot contour. So you see all that was not much more than 2 feet. This is a 5-foot contour, that's an 8-foot contour. 5 years later, you can see that 5-foot contour has pushed all the way up through the lake. So that whole area that was 2 to 3 feet deep is now 5 feet or more. And the 8-foot even, which was to here, I don't know if you can see it, now that's expanded. Again, we look at it in cross-section, and that is that north section that was, 2 feet or so deep. It's all been digested, and that's what it looks like now. The interesting thing with this is, again, we do the measurement, and this is a bit confusing, I need to simplify it, but if we look at lake volume in acre feet, and this is one of the problems of traveling around the world, because some people want in cubic yards, some want in cubic meters, some want in acre feet, but we'll look at cubic yards. There was 250,000 cubic yards of water in the lake when we started. At the end of the first year, we had digested 47,000 cubic yards of sediment, which meant there was that much water. At the end of the second year, we more or less doubled the amount we digested, which went that. 2020, not much happened. Reason being COVID. We weren't able to travel, we weren't able to dose, and nothing happened. So, that shows the value of continuing to dose. And you'll see that, since we've resumed, we have resumed. So on 250, we've increased that now to 388. There's actually a 55% increase in the volume of water in that reservoir. In some places where they're losing storage capacity in the reservoirs, that's a sort of value proposition on its own. And then this just shows you the average depth. The average depth of the lake has gone from 5.1 feet to 7.9 feet. We've almost 3 feet across the whole lake over 5 years. This is cyanobacteria have, what they do, this is in New York, they test the water every week. I think it's from the 15th of June until Labor Day. That's usually about 72, 75 days. And you'll see in 2016, 2017, for 56 days the entire lake was closed, and for 66 days at least one beach was closed. We began the program in 2018, 2019, 2020. Whoops, sorry. Problem solved, and the lake is usable again. This then is drinking water, and this is Bowling Green, that's the Maumee River on the left-hand side. And this is only about 30 miles south of Toledo. And the Maumee River is one of the main sources of the problems in Lake Erie. So this is an island in the middle of the river. Their drinking water reservoir only holds about 28 to 30 days supply. So all the way through summer, they've got to keep pulling water out of that river, and the water in the river is really, really bad. There's another town called Defiance, not too far away. They've got a massive reservoir. They fill it up in winter, and they just sit out the summer and gradually draw it down. They don't have to keep drawing this in. This shows you the problem. So this is the water in the river, and you've got a cell count of 150,000 cells per mil in the river. In the reservoir, even though they're using a peroxide algicide, they're not really dropping it much, but this is the real problem, is that 68% of those cells are cyanobacteria. So, two problems. One, it clogs their filters. Two, if the toxins are there, they can't produce water. We began the program in April of 2017. This is the same week. It's week 31 of the year, peak summer. The situation in the river is pretty much the same. But in the reservoir, we've got about a 75% drop in cell count, but more importantly, we've got the cyanobacteria under control. We've shifted that balance. And they've got pretty good fish in that reservoir. This then's your neighbours just down the way. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but in some ways it's not dissimilar to your lake. There's quite a lot of coves and so on. They came to us, they first contacted us in 2019, and it was a dredging project. So they had a quote, and some people had come, and this is actually running south to north, and this was getting very shallow, and they had a quote, people were going to dredge out 400,000 cubic yards from that end, from the shallow part. And the first thing we did when we looked at it, we said, well, that doesn't make sense, because usually when a river comes in, the dam wall's there, what the river will drop first is sand. And the organics will drop, settle out further. So you're unlikely to have a lot of organics in that shallow part. So you're going to go and dredge it out, and you're not really addressing the right part. So they agreed, we kind of saw the logic in that, and we went out, this was in 2019, to go and do a bathymetric scan, do some sampling and so on. And it's interesting because people with docks here, just off the edge of their docks, they had a lot of muck and sediment. But as soon as you got out into the main river, it was hard. And again, I was talking to the lake committee, we had guys out in the lake, and they said, you've got to come and see this, bring the lake committee to see it. The bottom was rock hard, it was sand. There was no muck and sediment where they were going to spend all their money taking it out. And we said to them, the real problem we believe you guys have or are going to have is HABs, toxic HABs. And they said, we have a lot of algae, and the visibility in the water is about 6 inches, but we don't think it's a HAB problem. So anyway, in 2021, because we only got this program going in 2022, they started testing, because in February, somebody sent me a photograph and said, it's winter, what do you think this is? Sent it off to an expert, he said, that's Dolichospermum, you've got HABs in your lake already in February. So this is the dissolved oxygen. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit here. And that just shows you, this is meters, that 15 feet, dissolved oxygen dropped right down, and that's all the fish were here, and they were saying the fishing is great, but as that gradually progresses, your fish life's going to die off. So that's August 2021, August 2022, we said we aimed for 5 milligrams, we've got that all the way down to the bottom.
What are HABs?
Harmful algae blooms.
Okay.
That's a cyanobacteria, they're harmful because of the toxins. So when we analysed the algae here, we found 80–90% of the phytoplankton was harmful algae bloom species capable of producing toxins, and their numbers were through the roof. So what we have to do then is firstly build up some competition to the cyanobacteria. As I hopefully explained earlier, in a eutrophic environment, the HABs take advantage, competitive advantage, and marginalise the good algae. So this is the sort of test we do, where they send a sample off to the lab, and they say, how many different taxa, how many different species are there? Here there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's just a kind of miscellaneous stuff. And out of those 7, 5 are harmful algae bloom species. So we put that on a graph here. We say, out of 7 different species identified, 5 were harmful algae blooms, harmful algae species. So there's not much competition. They've kind of got the rule of the roost. We began in May 2022, and you can see how we're building up biodiversity and building more and more competition. And if we just look May against May against May, we've got now competition to the cyanobacteria. So that's all well and good. We have competition. Next question is, how well are they competing? So this is just another way of looking at that data. In 2021, 70–80% of the biodiversity was HABs. The following year we dropped it down to 30–40-ish. Last year it was down 15-ish. How well are they competing? And just to summarize it, so this is the situation we had in 2021. That was the level, called 160 of total algae, of which 80% was HABs, and there was hardly any good green algae that's going to nourish your food web. We've dropped the total amount of algae. So the clarity and visibility of the water has gone from less than a foot, probably 6 to 8 inches, down to 3.5 feet. The cyanobacteria volumes have gone down, the good green algae species are going up. And that is translating already into better fishing and so on. To drill down into the dredging side of things, we're going to zoom in on two of the coves here. This is the bathymetric scan in 2019, this is 2023. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. That is the 5-foot contour. So this cove, the lake's over here, this cove comes in like this. This is sort of 5 feet, that's 4, gets all shallow, there's a little bit of a hole there. That is the 6-foot contour. So basically there's nothing 6 foot or more there, and that is 11. If we look in 2023, that is the 5-foot contour. So we've kind of digested and almost opened up a channel there. Our hope would be that that would connect up in the next year or so. That is the 6-foot contour. So that is pushed, but in addition to that, we've got 6-foot holes appearing further into the cove. The 11-foot is pushed through, and we even have a 13-foot hole there. So again, we can, I don't know if you can see it, but we've done a transect line, so we can look at it, and you can see here that where it was 4 feet, it is now 6 feet deep. Here where it was, well, maybe 6 or 7 feet, it is now 8 or 9 feet, and there's a 13-foot hole. The other cove, now this is on the other side of the lake, so that's the shallow end, the lake is here. That's the 5-foot contour. That is the 10-foot contour. That is an 18-foot, so there's 3 18-foot holes there. If we look now, this was all, that's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That was really, really shallow. We're 5 feet up here now. That is the 10-foot. That is the 18-foot. So, that is all joined up and become a single trench. We had a 19-foot hole there. Yeah, that's a 19-foot hole. This is the 20-foot contour. And that, I think, is something like 24. And again, we can look at it in profile, and you can see how it's gone from the green down to the blue. Just to give you some idea of scalability, this is a drinking water reservoir in Puerto Rico. We've got 850 acres, I think, treated there. It's 170 feet deep, so we can go deep, we can go big. And this is sort of a bit more technical, probably not that relevant to you guys, but because the water quality was so bad, they were using a lot of treatment chemicals. One of those chemicals is chlorine. Chlorine produces what they call disinfection byproducts, one of the main ones being trihalomethanes, which are carcinogenic. And so they sit in this problem. If they don't use lots of chlorine, they can't kill off the bugs. But if they use lots of chlorine, they then put carcinogenic stuff into drinking water. Well, the increase in improvement in water quality meant they basically halved their chlorine treatment, which meant that for the first time in their 2 drinking water plants there, they are compliant, whereas the reservoir next door, they're not. But the other interesting thing about this is the fish life, because they used to have massive fish kills. The pelicans had virtually disappeared, the fishermen had given up, and the fish eagles were down to their last pair. They will, literally within 2 years, were back in huge numbers. And that's the acid test of, well, it's all well and good, but are you actually regenerating the food web? Well, there it is. That's your clearance mechanism re-established. This is one in Colorado, which is quite interesting because it just out of the blue, somebody drew our attention to it. The Ornithological Society published on their webpage or their Facebook page a thing saying, wow, you should get down to Warren Lake, you will not believe the bird life there since they've implemented that program. So again, that shows the bird life are back because the fish is back, because the nutrient clearance is back, and the HABs have all gone. And just out of interest, this is a aquaculture operation in Australia. You've got two identical ponds next to each other. They're growing fish there, which sells into Japan and Asia at something like $20 a kilogram, like $10 a pound. That pond is one where we're managing the water quality and so on. Fish mortality is better, disease is much better, and so on. This is what has historically been considered best practice and the best way of managing your water quality. You can see what the difference is. And that's pretty much it. So, like I say, it's all about addressing those things. That's what we focus on, that's what we measure, and that's the difference that we try and make. Yep.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around this. So, for years, forever, we've thought that our lakes that are filled and maintained through watershed runoff have been filling from the silt that the runoff brings with it when it comes into the lake. And that has led to the shallowing of the coves and problems. Now what I hear you saying is, well maybe, but probably the problem.
Well,
It's
it's
a cycle of
probably a mixture of the
vegetation.
two, yeah. I mean, if you get stormwater inflow, so we had that Indian Lake last year, there was, I think it was about July, August, they reckon that the lake went up about 15 or 18 inches in 48 hours. That's how heavy the rain was. Well, if you've got that level of stormwater coming in, I guarantee you there's sand and silt coming in with it. But yeah, a lot of it. And if it was purely sand and silt, you wouldn't get the algae, the weeds, all that sort of stuff. It's the nutrients and the muck and the so on that's in there that is fueling that.
Oh, as the coves get more shallow,
Yeah.
more sunlight penetrates,
Yep. That is
more
exactly.
vegetation grows.
Which will bring the weeds up. And if it's a deeper, so funny enough, Indian Lake, because it's pretty deep, they more or less don't have a weed problem. All the nutrients produce biomass in the form of algae and cyanobacteria because it gets very deep, as you say. And it's only in the shallow areas where you'll get weeds.
So with proper treatment, that portion of what we think is sediment will be digested
Yeah.
and reduced, and the coves would get deeper as
Yeah.
a result.
Now, what we'll often do is go and take samples of the sediment and you send them off to the laboratory so they can measure the organic content of the sediment. And we've had occasions where it's come back and the labs have said there's 13%, there's 12, there's 15, there's 18% organics. It's not much. But they do that analysis by mass, by weight. So they take their sediment sample, dry it out to get a dry weight. Then they incinerate it at 800, 1,000 degrees, where all the organic matter gets incinerated. And then they weigh what's left. So we're trying to find, and we're talking to a laboratory in Michigan to see if they can't develop a way of measuring volume. Because the way to look at that is your sand and your silt is heavier. It's like having steel balls in there. The organic matter is like little polystyrene foam chips. So although 80% of the mass might be inorganic and 20% or less is organic, the volume is the other way around. And so we've taken, in fact we had one in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and it was pretty much an L shape. The one huge big cove was where they did all their water skiing, and that was getting shallower and shallower, and that was really what triggered them doing it. And in the second year we digested enough that somebody said, well, the spring's back. So that spring had disappeared 10 years before because it just basically blocked out by too much sediment. We digested it enough that the spring was feeding the lake again. Yep.
Does dredging ever play a role in sediment reduction?
If it's very sandy, if it's sand that has come in, well then that's the only way you're going to get rid of it. But dredging, typically, and we're getting more and more inquiries on this from engineering companies whose normal kind of knee-jerk thing is to go to the dredging companies. We are typically about 10 to 20% cheaper than the dredging. And physical dredging is not only to get the water out of the sediment off the bottom, is to get it often onto a barge and then onto the shore, and then you've got to go and dispose of it. Now there's a lake up in Michigan. They are arguing with their state DNR because for 15 years they kept giving them permits and telling them put copper sulfate, put copper sulfate, put copper sulfate. And they've been killing their algae with copper sulfate to the point where the lake is shallowed out completely with all this dead algae, slime and muck and so on. So although the state agency did not like dredging, they in 2021 said to them, yeah, you know, if you apply for a dredging permit, we'll look on it favourably. In order to apply for it, they had to analyse the muck and sediment, which they did, and the permit was refused because the metal content was so high that it couldn't be safely disposed of on land. And what was the metal? Copper. So they're saying, but you're the guys who told us to put the copper in, now you can see where they can do.
So, per year, I've heard something or read something 4 to 6 inches about each year.
Yeah,
It gets deeper based off of the system you've got.
And you know, as you get deeper, it will slow down over time. A lot of lakes, once you have it under control, in order to just bring the cost down, they kind of bring the dosing down. We can go more slowly now. So maybe 6 inches first year, 6 inches second year. So you know what, the water's clean, we're all happy. If we only go 2 or 3 inches the next few years, that's fine. So we can adjust it as far as that's concerned. But typically, in most lakes where you have a lot of invasive weeds, you've got a lot of algae, you've got a lot of that organic muck, 4 to 6 inches is what we can achieve with the right level of dosing and the right oxygenation.
So if I get this right now, you're going to be introducing enzymes in a process to the lake. Is it strictly enzymes, or is there any kind of mechanical process, or what's your process of doing it?
We put the radar oxygenation system in. That requires compressors on the shoreline. Each one of those has an individual air supply going to it, and we can adjust and balance those. There's no electrical wiring or anything like that going into the water. That oxygenates. Then what we do, there's basically 2 main ways of dosing. The one is we put micronutrients in, which is how we get that shift in cyanobacteria back to good algae and get the food web going. And the other is the enzymes. The micronutrients, what we're doing increasingly now, and we've got this at Indian Lake, is automated dosing, and we dose every single day with that. And that gives much better results than, kind of patchy dosing. With the enzymes, it's almost the opposite. You need to get an effective dose for them to do something, and they will work better in warmer waters. So what we tend to do there is May through to September, we come and dose typically once a month off a boat, and we'll go and apply it, where we think. Often we'll put it into the coves if it's something like Indian Lake where there's lots of coves. So and that's how that works. Yeah.
So is this a long-term thing, or, what's the time frame typically of these lakes, especially like ours? Are we talking about a 5 to 7 year thing, or?
Well, once the system's installed, that really is a maintenance system. You need that oxygenation. That's yours. You might as well, keep running it. The dosing, like I say, that typically will come down quite dramatically over time, and you'll hit a maintenance level. We've got systems and programs that have been running 10, 12, 15 years, and they're still running as effectively as they were on day one.
So there's no end. It's just you get it to a level that is acceptable,
and then
you have to maintain it.
Yeah, then it goes to maintenance
until
level.
whatever.
And then the other question people often ask is, do you need to run it all year? Do you only run it during summer? At Indian Lake and at quite a few others where they're bad when we start, we say run it all year. we did one. We had one opportunity it was in the Poconos, where we did a bathymetric scan in April and we did one in October, so we could see what happened during summer. They kept it running, and we did one the following April, we could see what happened in winter. And they got about half the rate of digestion in winter that they got in summer. So, there is still benefit. At Indian Lake, 2 winters now, they've run it right the way through. Probably at the end of this year, we can turn it off during winter, saves a bit of electricity, and then we'll start it up again, probably around about March. So it's really how intense is the problem and how quickly do we need to get on top of it. And once we're on top of it, then we can easily...
Yeah, it's bad, we'd like to solve that June.
Sorry?
How many aerators do you use in a lake typically, and does the improvement only happen around the aerators, or is it?
No, it's systemic. You kind of invited me to get on my hobby horse, which I know I bore the pants off people when I start talking about it. Systems theory as opposed to kind of Newtonian science. And a lot of the engineers have difficulty with this. If we go back to that picture of Tovaka, if a lake is shallow, the footprint that each one of these covers is relatively small.
So define shallow.
6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet. So in a 6 foot, that one I showed you in New Jersey is 9 acres, and I think there's 10 in there, and the average depth is 8 feet. So in the shallow ones, you might want 2 or 3 per acre. Here we've got about 1 every 25 acres on average over the whole thing, because it's 170 feet deep. Now, a lot of people say, well, it doesn't make sense, you've got so much more water, surely you need more, but it's not plain belts through the water, we're actually doing bigger things than that. So what we do in the design process, we get that bathymetric scan, so we have the depth profile. We then run that through an algorithm, and that says, right, you need so many, and this is where they need to be. Then what we do is say, okay, what are the options for compressors, locations? And then we can run permutations. Do we put one big one, and that'll be at this cost, but a lot of airline to get all around the lake? Or do we go 2 smaller ones, which might save on, might increase the compressor cost, but you save on airline? We run the permutations until we get the lowest cost option.
Will this work where, because we've got some places in these coves, and you'll sink knee deep in muck before you hit solid ground? I mean,
Yeah.
it will take, eventually it will take all of that, and
Well, over time, I don't know whether you've contacted the guys at Indian Lake, but
I have.
Mike Schwartz on the committee there, he's a fairly short guy, he's got a hell of a sense of humour. And I remember we were talking once, and one of the guys said exactly that. He said, well, when I step off my dock, he said, I'm up above my knee in muck. And Mike said, you think you've got a problem? He said, my muck's the same depth as yours, I'm up to my neck. And he quite literally, he was raving this year. He said, Dave, I can't believe it, 2 years, I'm ankle deep, and I can feel the bottom, and I can let my grandkids go in again, and they're not going to get sucked into the quicksand sort of thing.
And I've talked to him 3 times, and he is definitely loving it, what they've done. So that's one of the reasons why I asked him to come down.
You're saying compressors, they're run by compressors?
Air compressors, yeah.
What is the noise factor?
Controllable. We have learned how to get better noise reduction. One of the mistakes they made at Indian Lake was they went for a steel-sided shed, and steel reverberates and doesn't kill the sound as well. We've got one in Pennsylvania, and that was interesting. They had some people out from India, and they had the exact same question. They want to see one of these systems, they want to see how noisy it is. And what you have is you've got a property here, a property there, and a piece of common land, which is where the shed is. The property here, they were just starting to build on when we installed the system. And I went there with these two guys from India, and it's a pretty steep slope, and it was raining, it was wet and so on, so we were stood at the top, and I said, you know, I don't know if we want to go down here. And somebody came out from the house and said, you know, can I help you? What are you guys doing? And we said, well, yeah, we actually want to go down and show these guys the compressor shed down there. And he said, what compressor shed? I said, well, just behind the bushes, right next to your boundary line, there's a compressor shed. He said, I've never heard anything. He was amazed when we went down there. Now, they put up a wooden shed, and they put really good soundproofing on it. And, I mean, quite literally, you stand from here to there. In fact, we were stood about from here to that doorway, and you could hear the air conditioner in the house, which is probably 30 yards away, and you couldn't hear the compressors. So it can be managed. If you open the door, it's loud, but it can be managed.
How big are the sheds?
It depends. That is the one I'm talking about now is 120 acres, and we've got two compressors running, but it's positioned so that both compressors are in one shed. And that shed, I think it's 12 by 8. At Indian Lake, because it's a long fin thing, we've got two different sheds. I think they're each 8 by 10. So, yeah.
Who maintains the compressors?
We do generally.
I've talked to, what was his name again? Mark or Mike?
Mike Schwartz.
Yeah, I talked to Mike and he said that there's been a couple occasions where fishermen have maybe ended up cutting one of the lines, but maintenance comes in and you just very easily can connect the two lines with a separate piece of hose and it's back up running.
Yeah. So, lady there, yeah.
I'm curious about the two small lakes that we have, because one is situated higher than the other, and it overflows down into the other, and it's the smallest lake up at the top, and it's the one that gets all of the runoff into it. So is there a difference in the way that you would treat that, because it's so small, and most of the muck doesn't flow over it's the water that flows over?
Yeah.
In principle, there's no difference. Yeah, in that we're going to do the same sort of things. Often, where we have those sort of things, where the things are in a row, often the worst one is the one at the far end. And we say, well, let's start at the top end because we'll improve it as we go down, rather than try and improve the last one when you've still got all the rubbish flowing in from upstream. So sometimes we'll tweak it, but in principle, it's the same approach.
Okay.
Yep.
How many of these units or whatever it is out in the water would we have in Autumn Lake? Because the buoy at the front of our cove never survives the boating season anyway. And just the buoy never makes it. What kind of used to?
I honestly don't know. I cut this video short. Let me just go and show it. It's not a problem. There's nothing on the surface. So, whether you're kayaking or water skiing, I've got another video clip somewhere where there's a girl about 7, 8 years old on one of these sort of tube type things, and they go right over the top of the unit. There is nothing there. The only problem, like you say, is sometimes in very shallow areas. And one of the problems we had at Indian Lake was these guys in their wakeboards would go to the shallow part and they warmth like this, then the propeller goes down to the bottom, hits the bottom, and on a couple of occasions that actually cut the airlines. But that's a problem at the bottom, not at the surface. It's not like having a buoy or something floating up.
So how far down do these units sit under the water?
However deep the water is.
So 65 feet, they come up 5 feet, 10 feet from the bottom?
No, it sits on the bottom. If it's 170 feet deep, it's 170 feet down on the bottom. That's one of the critical things. If you, a lot of these diffusers they cause turbulence, so they stir the muck up, so they can put them up. on a, they'll put them 18 inches up above the bottom. Well, that means you've got that deoxygenated level at the bottom that continues doing the damage. We sit right at the bottom, there's no turbulence, all we do is oxygenate.
So if it's 50 feet, it's really 49 feet because
Yeah.
they're about 18 inches.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's about
It's
2
not like this far from the surface.
It's 2 inches.
Okay.
That's all it is, it's 2 inches. Yeah.
So once you go this way, there's no chemicals, no spraying, right?
Yeah, no,
As far as like herbicides
Yeah.
or,
no. Like I say, we had that one in New Jersey, they just said, we want to nuke it, just you guys will deal with it. There was another one somewhere where there was an area that was particularly bad, and I'm actually going next week up to Wisconsin. They've got it's a man-made lake, it's 2,500 acres, it's quite deep. 1,000 acres is about 6 to 8 feet deep, and that apparently was 1,000 acres of topped out weed all summer. And we said to them there, in the light of what we did in New Jersey, where we might want to do that there, is just whack it down, because otherwise it could be 2, 3, 4 years getting on top of it. We'll design so that we hit it down with herbicides, we'll manage the oxygenation. One of the problems when you use the herbicides, you kill that biomass off, it decomposes, depletes oxygen, that'll often cause fish kills.
yeah.
Well, in that situation, they've got 2,000 acres of water that fish can go into if they're feeling really bad, and we can manage it. So we may use it there, but in general, no.
Can you take us from cradle to grave on the process of, yes, we want to do this, to the end?
Yeah. So the first thing we need is the bathymetric scan and data. And if you have any historic water quality data, we would want that. Once we have the bathymetric scan, we can design the radar oxygenation system to go in there and put a cost to that. And then put a cost to the dosing program. Typically these days people are asking for a 5-year initial program that we kind of commit to. So we would do that. Then it's really, it's getting better now. With COVID, the lead times went out, but probably 8 to 10, maybe 12 weeks after placement of an order, we can install, provided electricity is being put in place, the sheds are put in place, and then away we go.
Do you have like a educated guess or a ballpark of what you think this could run?
I don't, to be quite honest, I don't
Yeah.
think. I can't even think offhand how many acres are there altogether. You've got, but the 2 small ones are very shallow, the other one's kind of medium. Autumn Lake's pretty deep, isn't it?
Right. That's where
Probably
Marty's.
70, it was originally constructed, it was 85 feet to the toe of the slope from the top of the dam. Since then, the dam has been raised and it's silted in, so we're at 70 feet, 125 acres impounded.
So that autumn is 125.
Yeah.
Then
53, and that's probably 50 acres at the dam. And the 11 acre lake
yeah,
is 30 feet. And then you've got the intermediate dam, impounding 6 more acres, and I bet it's maybe 3 feet deep now.
yeah. So you got 3 and 11 and 50. So it's about 50-50 between the big one and the other 3 put together. Because the big one has got depth, it wouldn't surprise me if the costs were like 60 on the 3 small ones and 40 on the big one. Just because that depth helps,
You talking about percentages of the cost? Is that what your 60/40 is?
No, I'm just saying the proportion.
Oh.
If it was $100, it would be $60 for the 3 small ones and $40 or whatever for the big one.
Or something.
Just because of the nature, I really haven't. Look, it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars over a 5-year program. Make no mistake. But we really haven't seen any debt profile, haven't seen any water quality stuff or anything. So to start.
Do they spread out the equipment over that period, or do you have to pay that
all for, right from the start.
Yeah, so typically, year one, you've got the cost of the equipment plus the dosing in year one. Year two, you just got the dosing, and that decreases over time. There is a couple of finance companies who will finance it, but obviously they charge a whole pile of interest on it and spread it out over time. I think we've only had one community ever go for that. Just because when you work it out, people say just pay for it and get it over with.
I can give you some numbers based off of my conversations with them, and they wanted to collect 1.5 million over a 3-year period to get it done, but they have a 320-acre lake also. So,
Is there a separate charge for the scans that you have to do to kick off this process?
Yeah, but it's pretty nominal. We would probably do it in 2 days, I would think.
But for how much?
Well, we have maybe $10,000 with the travel and the people and so on. And what we could try and do there would, depending on timing, but we could coincide that with a visit to Indian Lake. So we're not paying a separate set of travel costs and so on. That could be one option there.
Would the scan tell you, like, I believe there's at least one cove. The depth problem is the water runoff dumps rock into the cove. So I don't think enzymes really eat rocks up.
No.
Would it tell us that, all right, this isn't gonna fix this particular cove problem, or, will that scanning stuff tell us?
The company that does the software, they claim it will. It will tell you how hard it is, whether it's soft or hard or not. We don't trust it, and when we've challenged them on it, they've kind of backed off and said, it's a big sales and market in reality. So it can sort of give you an indication, but it's not definitive. But what we will be doing will be, probing it and testing it and checking out whether it's hard or soft whilst they're doing the scan. So we get a better idea by doing that than by just trusting what the scan shows up.
So of all your programs, what's the success rate?
There's only been 2 projects, and it was before I got involved in the US business, and I would not have done them because you can't do a part of a lake. A lake's a lake. And what they did on the one, I think it was a 2,500 acre lake, they did about 200 acres. And they did another one that was about, more or less the same, about a 200 acre lake, they did about 20 acres. And you can imagine if your lake's like that, and you've got sludge and sediment like this, if you put a system in here and you drop that like that, it just flows back in and fills it up. So there was quite an argument almost on the lake, because the people who were out there in summer checking the depth were saying, well, it's definitely gone down. It's gone down, it's gone down a foot or whatever. You go back in October and check October against October, and there was no difference. So, those 2 we didn't, but it's because you can't do a patch of a lake. It's fluid, that muck, it'll fill itself in.
so what you're saying is when you do a lake, it must be located in various areas throughout the entire lake.
You must do the whole lake, so you're taking it all down. You can't. I mean, you can imagine it's mud. You take a spadeful out, it just fills itself up again, and you never see it. Yeah.
Is there warranty or lifetime on these, that it's covered or it has to be replaced?
There are warranties. The compressor manufacturers give warranties on that. We give warranties on the radio units. It's very rare that we have problems with those. Like I say, we've got units that have been down there for 10, 12, coming up 15 years, some of them. Every now and again will be a problem, and it's replaced as part of the maintenance program.
So no chemicals are used that would hurt the golf course, which uses water out of Spring Lake?
No, not at all, no. like I say, I mean, we're using the same chemicals in drinking water reservoirs, so, and it's improving the water quality.
Have you ever run into a lake that just the water runoff was greater capacity than the system can handle?
No, not that I'm aware of, you know, provided we have the right information, we're okay. We have had some, in fact, Tawaka, that went through a drought period where the level of the lake dropped about 70 feet. You know, which is obviously, you know, big impact, but the system still did its job. If the level dropped so much that some of the diffusers were exposed and out in the air, that would then be a problem.
What? I didn't understand the question. He did.
Well, like where Mark lives, he had that seawall put in, so they, you know, basically dredged out everything to put the seawall in. Within a year, he had a foot of junk built up again because he lives right off of
So
the
it's
entry
come at
of
the
one of the spill.
debris, the sand and silt and sticks.
I filled his hole back in.
So it's, you know, I just wonder, I mean, if the runoff's pumping a foot of stuff in a year, is the system gonna eventually keep up with this, or are we?
Yeah, I guess there's always exceptions. We haven't come across that. The question would be whether that is organic and, you know, muck and leaves and that sort of stuff, or whether it is inorganic and sand.
No, it's organic.
Well, then we can normally, you know, if it's organic, we normally digest it faster than it's accumulated.
Yeah, I think we probably have, I'm guessing most of the stuff's either organic or rock.
Yeah,
Is what's
like you
filling
say,
them up.
enzymes can't
So-
digest rock. You know, it's not-
The only,
Rock,
I
paper,
think the
scissors,
only sand
enzymes,
we have
rocks.
here is the beach that, you know,
But you had about,
washes off the, but that's not natural, we buy it and bring it here.
Yeah. Any more for any more?
Since we have 4 lakes here, I mean, is your company open to doing, you know, for financial reasons, you know, maybe the 2 small ones to start with and add on the
If need be.
others?
I think that was one of the things when I showed you the 2 smaller lakes that
Yeah.
have the dam in between.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned something about the fact of that being a prototype to show everybody on how
Could be.
well it could work.
I think the only thing, like I say, you know, if you look at proportionality of cost, you've got, what, 15 acres there in total. And you've got, what, maybe 300 acres altogether, so that's what, 5% of the surface area of the lakes. It's probably going to cost, you know, 25-30% of what it would cost to do the whole thing. As long as people understand that and don't say, well, if it costs that for this much, we scale it up. It
there an
scales
economy,
differently with depth.
an economy of scale, if the per unit cost less if we do it all at one time versus piecing it out.
It probably would a little bit. What I'm saying is, you know, that 15, so in the same way that I said, you know, the big one might cost 40, you know, it'll cost 30, well, that split might be 30 and 30 on the small 2 ones, the 2 small ones. That's what I'm saying. So 15 acres might be 30% of the cost of the whole thing. There would be marginal savings in, you know, doing it all in one go as opposed to doing it in 2-3 different steps, but marginal. It's not going to increase it. It's more the proportionality because of the depth and so on that I'm trying to speak to.
Is there a cost in you doing the legwork to give us a bid?
Just the cost in doing that, the bathymetric scan and the design work. And as far as that's concerned, that would make sense to do it all in one go, rather than come and, you know, scan them one at a time. We can probably do all of them in, like I say, in 2 days. So might as well do it in one go.
And you could do it around the time when you would do Cuba's, like,
Yeah,
to help
yeah. And that would,
cost.
yeah, don't tell them that, but, you know, travel costs are covered, so we just, you know, it's a time for the guys and a couple of nights hotel additional hotel and car hire and things like that.
So we pay you to collect the data, to give us a proposal that we may reject.
There's work involved.
What's estimating construction? Okay.
I mean, we could before that, like I say, I mean, I literally don't really any idea. You could probably give us enough information that we could give you a ballpark cost, and this is probably what it's going to end up being.
Which, a lot of that is based off of the depth and the sizes
Yeah,
of the
the
lakes.
Yeah. Do you have any water quality stuff at all, or are weeds a big problem? Is algae a big problem?
Other than the spring-fed lake, yes, if we don't treat the lake, probably by April, it will have algae
Okay.
all over it. And,
Okay.
I don't remember, what was the weed that we couldn't get killed?
Naiad grass and
last
Yeah.
year.
Okay.
So it's, and most of it happens in the coves, where the coves
Yeah.
aren't 60 feet deep, they're,
Yeah.
I could probably walk across my cove.
Yeah.
I can tell you on Spring Lake, when I pulled my boat out this year, it was worked on it for 3 hours cleaning the pontoons up.
Yeah.
It was filthy, way more than prior.
That should come on my whole night.
I was going to, and somebody called me, really, no.
You lose.
So I'm thinking money, would it be something that we would have to pay, say we decided to do this, pay it all up front, or can you do installment plans per month? I mean, per year?
Yeah, no, so it's annual. If we did a 5-year contract, year 1 you pay year 1's cost, year 2 you pay year 2's cost, and so on. You don't pay the full 5 years up front.
But the year one includes all the equipment. So
Yeah. So year 1 is loaded, unless you finance it, but financing it, the interest, the guys don't do it for nothing.
Realistically, are we too late in the game for this to have any effect this year?
No, not really. We'll be February. We'd probably have to come and do a separate scan. Do a special trip for a scan. But we're on, like I say, probably 8-10 week lead time. So we could probably get something in before Memorial Day if you pull the trigger on Monday, sort of thing, or in the next week or two.
If historically the coast will get chock full of weeds to where you can't even run a boat through it, will year 1 it stop that? Or are we?
It's one of those kind of, it depends. We could manage it. Once we understand it, we could always say, well, look, it's not the whole lake, if it's only the coast, put some herbicide in, we'll take it over from there. There's ways of managing it.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yep.
Can you swim in it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like I say, we're putting the stuff in drinking water reservoirs, so that there's no problems with any of the stuff we put in there.
I mean, we're putting in chemicals now
Yeah.
into the lake and
Didn't know that.
there at the beach and, yeah.
This for the board. Wouldn't this have to be voted on before anything could be done?
I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
What's it done for?
Not this year.
I mean, that's why we're here.
Okay.
Other questions?
Good presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I got one question.
Yep.
That's the coolest shirt I've ever seen. What?
got two of them.
Everybody.